Agricultural Revolution. The Agricultural Revolution began around 10,000 BC and is one of the most important turning points in human history. Before the shift, humans lived as hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years, moving constantly in search of food. Life was tough, and people relied on plants and animals, and their survival depended a lot on just nature. If it was winter or harsh weather, plants were hard to come by. But around this time, in places like the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, humans began experimenting with domesticating plants and animals. Instead of foraging for berries or barley, people started planting seeds, tending to crops, and harvesting their food. And instead of chasing animals and hunting them, they began keeping them for their product and meat. Now, this change may sound simple, but it completely reshaped human society. See, farming meant more reliable food supplies, which allowed populations to grow exponentially, and larger communities would eventually form. Villages, towns, all appeared during this time. And with permanent settlements came new technologies. They needed pottery for storing grain and berries. They needed better tools for farming, and even early irrigation systems appeared during this time. Now, because people could now produce surpluses of food, surpluses meant that not everyone had to be a farmer. For the first time in human history, some individuals could specialize in other tasks, like toolmaking, like trading, like governing. And this was the beginning of social hierarchies, religion, leadership, and much more. Now, permanent settlements also meant that disease could spread more easily, but overall, the agricultural revolution was one of the most defining events in human history, and without it, there would be no cities, no writing, no empires, essentially no civilization as we know it. Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BC in ancient Babylon, is one of the earliest and most complete sets of written laws in human history. See, King Hammurabi, who ruled Babylon at its height, wanted a system that would unify his empire and make law consistent for everyone. So he had about 300 laws in a massive stone tablet written in cuneiform and placed in a public square where everyone could see. Now, these laws themselves covered everything in daily life: trade, property, family, contracts, even crime, and some were really good, like regulations for builders and farmers. For example, if a builder made a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder himself could be put to death. Now, there were some problems. See, punishments were often dependent on their social class, meaning the wealthy, the commoners, and even the slaves faced much different consequences for the same crime. Now, the code wasn't just about punishments, it also offered protection. Widows, orphans, and the poor had some rights and could settle their disputes based on the laws written on the tablet. But what makes the code so significant is that it set a precedent that laws could be written, preserved, and applied to an entire town or even country. And this concept would spread throughout history, influencing later legal systems in the Middle East, but also Greece and Rome. Persian Wars. The Persian Wars, fought between 499 and 449 BC, were a series of conflicts between the Persian Empire and the smaller, often divided Greek city-states. Now, at the time, Persia was by far the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from India to Egypt. The Greeks were a bunch of independent cities like Athens and Sparta that were often fighting among themselves. Now, the conflict began when Greeks, living under Persian rule in Asia Minor, revolted with Athenian support, and this rebellion angered the Persian king, Darius I, who launched invasions to punish Athens and bring Greece under his control. The first big battle came at Marathon in 490 BC. Where the Athenians, though outnumbered, shocked the world by defeating the Persians, and according to legend, a messenger ran the 26 miles back to Athens to announce the victory, an event that inspired the modern marathon race. Now, a decade later, Darius's son, Xerxes I, returned with an even bigger army and fleet, determined to capture Greece once and for all. Now, this led to some of the most legendary battles in history: the heroic last stand of King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, the naval battle at Salamis, and the final Greek victory at Plataea in 479 BC. Now, this victory wasn't just about the smaller Greek city-states beating back the large Persian Empire. It was more about the fact that if Greece had been absorbed by the Persian Empire, the political and cultural ideas of Athens, like democracy, philosophy, drama, art, might have not flourished in the same way. Spread of Buddhism. The spread of Buddhism, carried out in the 3rd century BC, Ashoka, the third ruler of the Maurya Empire in India, came to power around 268 BC and initially followed the same path as many rulers of the time. He expanded through conquest. His early reign was marked by aggressive expansion through many wars, with his most infamous being the Kalinga War in around 261 BC. The conflict was very brutal, and ancient sources claim at the time that more than 100,000 people were killed and deported. And though he was victorious, Ashoka was horrified by the suffering he had caused. This moment would transform him, and Ashoka would embrace Buddhism. He turned away from war and violence, promoting a philosophy of compassion and non-violence. Ashoka began issuing edicts carved on pillars and rocks across his empire, which he laid his vision of governance. These edicts urged people to respect all religions, avoid the needless slaughter of animals, and practice kindness in their daily lives. He also used his vast resources to spread Buddhism far beyond India, as far as Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and even the Mediterranean, helping turn Buddhism into a world religion. And within his own empire, he focused on many welfare projects like building roads, planting trees, digging wells. Now, Ashoka was very important for the spread of Buddhism. The Silk Road. The Silk Road, beginning around the 2nd century BC. See, before the Silk Road, trade between the East and the West was very limited and slow. But as the Han emperors sought alliances and access to exotic goods, they opened trade routes from China through Central Asia and all the way to the Mediterranean. Now, these routes weren't a single road, but a network of paths that linked cities and mountain passes, which would allow merchants, diplomats, travelers to move goods, ideas, and culture back and forth. Silk, which was China's most famous export, was highly prized in Rome and the Middle East. But it wasn't the only product. Spices, metals, jade, ceramics, and even paper traveled along these routes. In return, China received horses, glassware, textiles, new crops. The Silk Road also became a conduit for culture and knowledge. Buddhism, for instance, spread from India to China, and ideas about medicine, astronomy, technology also traveled through this route. Now, the Silk Road wasn't always safe. Caravans faced deserts, mountains, and bandits would set up along these routes to steal the goods. But despite all of this, it remained very important for the ancient world. Rise of Christianity. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, beginning in the 1st century AD. At its beginning, Christianity was just a small sect within Judaism, centered on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who preached compassion and forgiveness and the coming of God's kingdom. After his crucifixion around 30 AD, his followers, most notably the apostles like Peter and Paul, spread his message across the Roman world. Paul, in particular, carried Christianity far beyond Jewish communities, helping it grow to a universal faith. Now, at first, Christianity spread quietly, often among the poor and marginalized groups. Roman authorities, however, were suspicious. Christians refused to worship the emperor or the Roman gods. This led to periods of persecution, with some believers executed as martyrs or even burned alive. Despite this, the faith continued to grow, mainly because of its devoted followers, but a turning point came in the 4th century AD when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity after his victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. Soon after, the Edict of Milan legalized Christianity, and by the end of the century, under Emperor Theodosius I, it had become the official religion of the empire. This was huge. Christianity had moved from a persecuted minority to the dominant faith in Rome's culture. It provided a unifying ideology for the empire and influenced everything from its law to philosophy. The fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. Now, Rome didn't collapse overnight. It was a slow decline and was due to a mix of internal weaknesses and external pressures. By the 3rd century AD, Rome was struggling. Its empire had grown so massive that it was nearly impossible to govern. Civil wars broke out as the generals competed for power, often propped up by their armies instead of any loyalty to the state itself. On top of this, the economy was faltering. Heavy taxation, corruption, and the over-reliance on slave labor weakened productivity. This also wasn't helped due to the amount of plagues and disease that were going around, making it hard for Rome to maintain its huge army. Now, while all of this internal issues were happening, new threats were pressuring the empire from the outside. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, along with the Huns, put enormous pressure on the Roman borders. In 410 AD, the Visigoths famously sacked Rome, shocking the ancient world, and in 455, the Vandals did the same. These invasions further eroded confidence in the empire's ability to protect its people, leading to its further decline, which would eventually lead to 476 AD, where the Germanic leader Odoacer deposed young Romulus Augustulus, marking the symbolic end of the Roman Empire, or at least the western half. The fall of the Roman Empire is one of the hallmarks of the end of the ancient world and the beginning of a very different era. Spread of Islam. The spread of Islam, beginning in the 7th century AD with the life of Prophet Muhammad, was a massive turning point in world history. See, Islam started in Mecca, in the Arabian Peninsula, where Muhammad preached a message of monotheism and moral conduct. His teachings quickly attracted followers, but also opposition to local leaders, leading to the Hijrah in 622 AD, where Muhammad and his followers migrated to Medina. This event marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar and set the stage for Islam to grow not just as a religion, but as a political system. After Muhammad's death in 632 AD, his successors, the Rashidun Caliphates, led military campaigns under diplomatic efforts that brought large areas of the Middle East, North Africa, and Persia under Islamic rule. The spread of Islam had massive cultural, economic, and scientific impacts. Sites like Baghdad, Cairo became hubs of learning. Knowledge from ancient Greece, Rome, India, and Persia were all preserved, translated, and expanded upon by Muslim scholars. The Arabic language also spread with Islam, creating a shared cultural and religious identity across vast territories. Not only reshaped the politics of the region, but accelerated the exchange of ideas, goods, and technologies across the Middle East and North Africa. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.